I think in my family, philanthropy was very much tied to community service, and community service came first. So that was something that I feel like I grew up with, and I wanted to be a part of and emulate it. When I was sometime in my mid-teens, I was aware that, I grew up in Hartford. It's probably in the mid to late 60s. I was aware that there was some great disparities in educational opportunities. That was pretty clear to me. The Hartford Current started a project to raise funds for an interracial scholarship fund. I think I had some kind of a part-time job at the time, and I decided that it was really important for me to send my own check to that. And I had a great feeling about doing that, but I was following my beliefs and my values, so those two things tied very closely together. That was the time when it became clear that there was great racial inequality, and that was something that, having grown up in at that time, largely white suburb, I was aware that there were other people who didn't have the opportunities or the advantages that I did, and it went against my value system that it was so unjust. So I felt that this was something I wanted to contribute toward. I think that my parents had each been volunteers in different ways. My dad contributing to scientific organizations, my mother doing a lot of the things in the church and with the family that many suburban mothers did, but there was definitely a focus and an emphasis on something outside yourself. So you had not just a responsibility, but an opportunity to contribute to the community at large.
My experience is really a little different. I grew up in Maine, and very modest background, and there really wasn't that awareness of a greater community. That didn't really happen for me until later. My father was involved in Boy Scouts, as was I. But other than that, and some church activities, that was really it. Again, coming from modest means, the notion of giving outside of the church and some small community things really wasn't part of our life. So that was one of many things that I learned from my wife when we got married. We both went to school during the late 60s, and that really affected me. I mean, that was sort of my awakening into what was going on in a large context. I was interested in urban problems, and after graduating, I spent a year as a VISTA volunteer. We were the first VISTA volunteers in the suburbs, and it was very interesting. We actually worked with corporations. It was the first sort of loaned executive program with the Urban Coalition where I worked. I remember going into the offices of IBM, where there was a senior vice president heading up the effort, and the goal was to look at a number of social problems in Westchester County, New York, and to try to do something about it at the end. And we had a meeting at IBM, and this was the time when IBM was, the white shirts and everything. Well, no one sent me the memo, and I show up like any other VISTA volunteer in my sweater, and I had no jeans, and it was fine. But it was very interesting. At the end of that 1 year, working with some people from the community, with executives, the executive from IBM got a bunch of the corporate heads together and raised some money for a program for ex-offenders in a healthcare center. And it was very interesting, and it sort of whetted my appetite. I think programs like VISTA, which was the Domestic Peace Corps, are often aimed more toward the people in the program rather than the people that are helping it to shape something, and I think it did.
Well, like Bob, in college during the Vietnam era, there was a lot going on. Your social consciousness couldn't help but be affected by what was going on around you. So that definitely had an impact on my worldview. But later, at the time that we moved to Hartford, we were a young couple. We had a child who was a year old. Bob had taken a job at a law firm in New York, and I was on a hiatus from work. And my doorbell rang one day, and the woman who was had found us this place to live said, "I think I have something that you should be doing. I think you should join the Junior League of Hartford." And I had sort of a bristling reaction that was, going to be too social for me, and I, wanted something a little bit more meaty. And what I found instead, that it was the meatiest of the organizations that I would have an opportunity to be affiliated with, that I would have an opportunity to look at what the community needs, to figure out how an organization like the League could hope to meet some of those needs, and then also, from a very personal perspective, get involved in doing some things that professionally I probably would not have had the opportunity to do. So it's sort of married. I mean, I think the thing about volunteer work for me and community service is that the volunteer should realize that they get as much as they give, if not more. And that is, so I hold volunteers to a very high standard, and because I think they get so much more back than that they actually give. So the Junior League definitely had a huge impact on me, both personally and professionally. I think what it comes down to is the League really knows that it's about serving the community, and you have an opportunity to develop a project, to look at what the community needs, raise the money to support it, do direct service or whatever. It was very meaningful to me.
What I've learned from Mary Ellen early on, she was very much a volunteer, and she said that she took it very seriously. And I learned an awful lot about what it meant, because I hadn't been through it and I hadn't really seen it before. And doing service in the community first as a volunteer, and then working with a couple of organizations, community service was always part of our family. And I think our children, our three children, were very much marked by seeing what their mother was doing. It wasn't until later on that I really got involved in the community, or at least to a greater degree than I had. So her work has been a mark on the family.
Position?
The interesting thing, I after I graduated from law school, I worked for the Manhattan DA's office. And in some ways it grew out of my Vista experience, where we had looked at programs for re-entry for ex-offenders. And it was a tremendous experience in public service, and what it was like to deal with justice in Manhattan. And when I came here to work with a local law firm, Ruther Kalina, one of the partners there said, I know of your background. I'm involved with a program for ex-offenders, and you ought to go on the board. So somebody invited me. I didn't really know the community that well, and it was a terrific experience. And that organization is still around today. And I picked up on later my interest with the Boy Scouts. I served for 10 years on the local council. And this is before I got involved with the foundation. But
when I think about my personal history with the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, I go back to my days as co-chair of a Junior League of Hartford Project Development Committee. We were looking at the problems facing teen mothers in the Hartford area. It happened to coincide with the time that the foundation was launching a good-sized initiative to address that problem. What I found from the foundation was that although we were just starting, it gave us access to the people who were ultimately going to be the collaborating partnership organizations in the community with the program that the League founded, named Friends of the Family. So that was my very first indication, and I had thought, to the extent that I had thought about the Hartford Foundation before, I had thought of it as an ethereal, very elite organization. What I found out was that the foundation was really rooted in community problems and had embedded itself in coming up with the very strategic solutions to those problems, and very importantly to people like volunteers in the Junior League of Hartford, connecting us to other people who were doing the kind of work that we wanted to do. So that was my very first entree to the foundation, and it was very positive. As we matured in our life and in our community service, we encountered the Hartford Foundation again. We were invited by several friends to take a look at what the Catalyst Endowment was doing in the community. And my first reaction was, do I really need another place to learn about what was going on in the community? Don't I already know enough? And on the other hand, when I started to take a look at it, I realized that this was an opportunity to leverage a fairly, finite and somewhat limited investment to learn about other things that are going on in the community and to make a greater impact with a large group of people.
Well, when Mary Ellen suggested that we get involved in Catalyst, I thought it seemed like a good idea. I didn't have an idea of the scope. We went to the first couple of meetings. This had to be, 10, 12 years ago. And we weren't there at the beginning, but we were there, and it was really, for me, eye-opening. I think the program was on some kind of an educational program. And it just, by going to different places and seeing what was going on in the community, there was a sense of vibrancy and hope, and some very intelligent conversation about the community, where at least my involvement or understanding was from the press, which was very negative, that things were not going well in Hartford and were always not going to go well in Hartford. And just a very different picture that you got to see for yourself. And it sort of grew on me as time went on. Seeing part of the community that really I didn't know was out there, and all the effort that was going in to doing something about it. I remember some of the conversations that we would have, that my view about people discussing social problems had always been, everything is interrelated and you really can't solve anything until you solve everything. And I would walk away feeling very depressed. And that was not what I heard at the Catalyst programs and at the foundation, that people had very specific ideas about what to do and what they were doing to address it. There were challenges, but it was very positive in terms of what was going on and what could be done. And Francine Christensen suggested that I come on the steering committee, and very low-key, I think you'll kind of like it, and she knew very well that she was just setting the hook, and it's set. And it got me more involved dealing with some very talented people, and I eventually became chair for a couple of years of the steering committee, and it was during the recession, and I deal in my business with distressed companies and things like that, and was very concerned about what was going on in the community. And I was very pleased that the foundation and the Catalyst members decided to look at basic needs. I think we did food, we did homelessness, new homelessness, and we did financial literacy in this period of time. And those aren't the most inspiring kinds of things, but I think they were very necessary for the time. People like to spend time looking at opportunities for people, and that's what's happening now. And I think it was, Catalyst is doing sort of the right thing at the right time. I was very pleased that in a time of stress that they were looking at those things, even though they weren't as interesting perhaps as some other initiatives. Catalyst does ask the grant recipients to report back, and I think some of the things that I'm trying to remember what they were, but I do remember in the food, access to healthy food, that one of the organizations was trying to make food available through local bodegas, and entering into arrangements with merchants for advertising in exchange for removing some probably more profitable but less healthy food and replacing it with more healthy food, which I thought was a very creative way of dealing with it. It seems to be effective. The other is there's a winter farmers market at Billings Forge, which is there, and they take the supplemental nutrition assistance there as well. And that was one thing I remember. But the core of the Catalyst program is it's only 3 sessions. And one of them examines whatever the problem may be that the members have selected. It does derive from the membership. It's not a small group of people that make the decision. The second program has to do with best practices, what's going on in the state or in the country. There's some marvelous people that have come and shared with us their take on these things. And the third thing is among the members. They make a grant to one or more agencies, and that's where you really learn. And certainly, I've learned more about the art of making a grant. What is it that you look for? I mean, there are so many good organizations out there, so many good causes. How do you decide and choose where you think the best place would be for your resources? And I think that's been very enlightening to me.
I think members of Catalyst have a great personal benefit from their participation, in that it makes them better and more engaged members of our community. I think it allows them to see things in a very different, very holistic way. It introduces them to people and concepts and organizations that they might not otherwise come across. And I think that it's a very uplifting feeling to be involved with a group of people who are all committed, may come from pretty different walks of life, pretty different backgrounds, but there's a commonality of interest in the community that is tremendous, and it's a pretty good feeling to be a part of it.
One of the strengths of Catalyst, I think, is its members. That while there's a lot of resources from within the foundation and from within the community that are brought to bear on a particular topic,